Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 105. Let me begin with a contest, which concluded just the end of last week. We have hundreds of essays have been submitted. Yet again, a huge success. Coming from all over the world, literally, from one end of the world to the next. Students, young men, young women, and we look forward to the evaluation process which has begun by organizing the essays and passing them on to the judges. We've established a special Hebrew judges that will be judging the essays specifically, and they'll all be in one big pot, and based on the scores, we'll determine the winners. First place winner will be a $10,000 prize, second place $3,600, and the third place $1,000. That's the actual prizes. But I would say the biggest prize of all is the actual effort. I want to commend all of you that submitted essays, those of you that didn't have the opportunity or didn't finish in time. There's always, next year, even Mashiach comes, I'm sure we'll be writing even better essays than we are today. Teirasa shel Mashiach, Primis Atei Chassidus, will be learned then even in greater ways than we are today, which is just Tayameh Chaim Zachu, just a taste, an appetizer of what is coming. And we look forward to announce the winners later, end of month of Adar Sheni. We'll keep you posted with all the details as they come. So again, I commend and thank all of you that participated, and look forward to yet another exciting read for all of us, seeing the contribution, the unique innovation, as well as the grounding to and connection to the sources of Chassidus, and applying Chassidus to our personal lives. No doubt, this is the ultimate Yafutzu Ma'anesecha Chutza, taking the Mayonis, Yafutzu, spreading them, distributing them, applying them in Chutza, even to language that the Chutza, the outer secular world, even the most distant outskirts, Chutza Shein Chutza Maman, as the Rabbi puts it, can understand, relate to. And I'm very proud and honored to be able to be part of this effort, and as well as, again, thanking all of you that participated. With that said, let us begin something about this week's time. Parsha that we're in, Parsha Vayakel, being it's a Shana Muberes, so Vayakel Pekudei are separate, as are some other chapters, in order to compensate for the extra month. We're in the middle of Adar Rishon, and actually coming to the close of Adar Rishon, the first Adar, approaching Adar Sheni, and therefore this coming Shabbos is also Shabbos Parsha Shkolim, being that it's blessing the new moon and the new month of the second Adar. So a few words on this topic. Vayakel Pekudei, as I mentioned, often are together, but then they come separate, and then the Vayakel is a separate idea and Pekudei is another. The last Parsha Vayakel that ever spoke to us, Esat, until now, was of course just 2 days before the stroke on that Shabbos Parsha Vayakel, and though it wasn't a fully edited talk, the Rebbe did make some edits to the Rishima, to the notes that were to the draft that was drawn up, and but the last Farbrengen that actually fully edited and completely was Kisisa the week before. And in Vayakel, the Rebbe speaks about, of course, the meaning and the theme of the word Vayakel itself. Now, Vayakel and Pekudei come together. Pekudei means to count individuals. Vayakel emphasizes the Kehillah, gathering together. The Rebbe speaks in many of the years how when they come together, it demonstrates the importance and focus of both the individual and the community and the coming together. But when Vayakel is separate, the Vayakel then is the main theme is Kehillah. Now, of course, we are in a year of Hakel. Again, the emphasis on the Kehillah part, not in any way, God forbid, to compromise the individual, but the Kehillah component, which is the focus on the synergy of the community. As we know, Vayakel is never meant to be a compromise of individuality. On the contrary, it's the synergy of the power of a community and a group. When many people are aligned toward one project, you can get a lot more done. As the Gemara says, the language of Chassidus is called Eir Ha'el al Kulona, the synergetic energy that rises above them all, which means, as the Gemara says in Seita, when the Smaraglim came back from their ill-fated mission to report about Israel, they came back and said, well, the mission itself wasn't ill-fated. Their results were, as they came to a conclusion and decided this is a land that we cannot conquer, we cannot enter. It's a land that consumes its inhabitants, and they described the greatness and the strength, the vastness, the giant the gargantuan size of the people and of the fruits of the land, and they brought back fruits, and the Gemara calculates how they carried those fruits. And in its calculation, one of the things we derive from is that when two people carry something, they can carry more than the sum of two, which means if one person can lift 100 pounds, another lifts 100 pounds together, they lift what? Not 200, more than 200 pounds. And you add a third person, it exponentially grows. So where is this invisible strength coming from? That's the strength of Vayakel, of Kehillah, the strength of the unity of several coming together. Beis is a Hebrew letter, Reish is a Hebrew letter, Vav is a Hebrew letter, Chaf is a Hebrew letter. Separately, they have their meanings, they have their significance. Put them together, what do you have? Baruch. This is the example used in Chassidus. You suddenly have something that's more than just a Beis, a Reish, a Vav, a Chaf. You have a concept called a blessing. Synergy is what happens when individuals are aligned toward one direction, and there's some type of Eila al Kulona, an accumulative power and energy that enters and emerges. And that's the power of Vayakel. That power of that synergy. And that's why Vayakel Moshe gathered, and from there we learned that Lahakal Kehillas, we should gather together communities on Shabbos. This is one of the edicts, one of the decrees that Moshe has passed, shared before he passed away. As well as, of course, in the year of Hakel, all this comes together in a more powerful way, as the Rebbe says that everyone should do in Hakel, which is gathering people together, learning together, praying, saying a prayer together, charity together, in a sense commemorating what the king did, the Melech did in the time of the temple, when every 7th year, meaning the year after the sabbatical, after the Shemitah, during Sukkot, he gathered at Hakelos Hanoshim Ba'ataf, men, women, and children, obviously separately in the right, proper way, and all in order to instill in them through reading Torah an additional awe and Yiras Hashem Alekecha, the awe of God, that will last them Kol Yemei Chayav throughout their entire lifetime. So that's the lesson of the power of a Yakel, which frankly has become something which today in healing circles, in psychological healing circles, people know this power. We'll be talking about it a little later. It's been replicated and proven to be successful, that there's something about a group that gives power to each individual. And here again, the focus is not on the individual per se, but on the group power. And of course, that Vayakel Tavshin and Beis, that emphasis, which of course brings us back, seeing being it's also 150 years from the Tzemach Tzedek's Yartzeit Istalkus and Tafresh Chavov, Tavshin Ayin Vov. So 50 years ago, when it was 100 years, the Rebbe focused on and told the story with the Tzemach Tzedek, that basically when he put himself in a dangerous situation and they asked him how could he do that, so one reason was that he said they're the children. In other words, something happens to the Tzemach Tzedek, the children will continue the great work. And the second thing is that the Achdus von Chassidim, when they fear Kegen Mashiach, meaning that the unity of Chassidim, the Kehillah, the Hakel of Chassidim will lead them to Mashiach. Emphasizing again and again the importance of Avos Yisrael and Achdus Yisrael, that though we are different, yet at the same time we are part of one large organism, one large entity directed toward one ultimate greater purpose. And each of us fulfills our particular role. In a way you can say a healthy system, a healthy human being, a healthy community is the essence of what applied Chassidus is. Teaching us to be the healthiest we can so we do not feel someone else is taking something from us. We do not feel inadequate, insecure, fearful, but knowing each of us is living up to what we have to accomplish. And we were given all the skills and all the tools. We were given all the strengths and faculties to fulfill our mission. Imagine if each one of us felt that way. We would not need to go to other strange pastures, nor we need to go and self-gratify ourselves or do other things that distract us from that mission. So in essence, Chassidus is here to help us clear those channels and reconnect and realign to why we were sent to this earth. That's at the end of the day the whole purpose. You are born and sent to this earth for a purpose. Are you living up to that purpose? Are you driven to live up to that purpose? That is the essential theme of Vayakel, in the sense where all of us are part of that general purpose, and each of us has our particular role in the Kehillah, in the community, in the larger community, in the community of the entire human citizenship, which is 7 billion people strong. And of course, Skolim, as I discussed last week, also emphasizes that point, that you're not complete without the other half. There were tzedakos and charities given in the Beis HaMikdash and other times that were commensurate according to the amount that a person earns. Meiser, giving a tenth, giving 10% of your income, or Chemish, 20% of your income, that's according to the income. But then it came to Machzas HaShekel, we're told, everyone, the wealthy one should not add, and the poor one should not subtract, should not diminish. Everyone is equal in this because everyone has what to give and everyone has what to receive. And the Machzas HaShekel is emphasizing the equal partnership, that you're not complete without the other. Again, the focus on the kehillah, on the call. Of course, this also emphasizes on the individual because you can't have a unit and a group without the individuals. But there's sometimes you focus on the individual, what are you doing? And sometimes you focus on how we are doing it all together as a team effort, leading to a greater place, which of course has the cumulative synergy, as I mentioned, that helps us achieve it faster and more expedited, more efficient fashion. So those two themes are dominate this week. The energy of the week, the parsha of the week, both the two parshas we'll be reading. This regular flow, which is parshas Vayakel, as well as parshas Shkolim, in the unique Dalet parshas, the 4 parshas that we read, basically coming from the month of Adar through the month before Pesach, through the Shabbos and Vorchen Pesach, or Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is parshas Shkolim, and then comes parshas Zochen and parsha Parah, and then parshas HaChedesh, which we shall discuss. Okay. With that said, let's continue here. First, a follow-up about gender separation. Hello, Rabbi Jacobson. Thank you for all your classes and discussing everything. My question is a personal one, and it's as follows. I like to learn from everything I went through, regardless how I was treated, in order to do the right thing for the next generation. Growing up in a Lubavitch family, my family was very loving and open. For example, I could have had a friend from the other gender if I wanted, but because of schools and friends, I didn't, since it would be looked at as unacceptable. So I didn't. I very much like the explanation you gave as why we separate, which I discussed in the previous episode 104. But why did Hashem make it like that? Why, when you go through puberty, you have a strong attraction for the opposite gender, if it's meant to be a time when you need to focus on your identity, and in order to have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, you will need to wait a long time until you're ready, in other words, to date and get married. Okay, good question. I discussed then, I just want to mention, I should mention it more often. Firstly, if you want to submit questions or comments, please do so at our forum, a completely anonymous forum, meaningfullife.com/mylife. 2, just for when we post this, after this episode is done, you can find it, of course, on my life, meaningfullife.com, my life, as well as that's an embedding of a YouTube video, where in YouTube you can also see the timestamps. We actually organize each episode by topic, so you don't have to listen to the whole thing to get to where you want to. You can just look at the headlines of the sections and click on the link of the timestamp, the time that tells you where it is, let's say minute 14, minute 15, minute 25, etc. Just wanted to share that. In addition, of course, that all these are available now for your downloaded to iTunes, that you can download it onto your computer or onto your iPhone, in your car, and so on. What's required to do so, however, is to sign up, meaning it's a free signing up. You just have to simply add your email address, and you become what's called a free member on meaningfullife.com, and that you have unlimited downloads of these episodes. That's readily available in any format, in any fashion that you wish, anytime, anywhere, in any location, in any place. So I just wanted to mention that because people have been asking about that. So now to answer this question, well, this goes back to the same question you can ask about so many things in life. It says, for example, God created, we're talking about genders, it says, the Eibishter said, Lasa Adam b'tzalmeinu k'dmusenu, I want to create the human being in my image. So what did he do? Zocher nekeva bara esam, he created male and female as one androgynous creature. And this male and female is a reflection of Tzelem Elokim, the divine image. But then he went, God, and separated the two. And now they search each other, which is called a soulmate, Alkein Yazav Adam, as Beisei. He leaves his home in order to find the second half. So you could say, why do we need to make it so difficult? Shidduchim, we know, is kosher kekriyas yamsuf. It's almost as difficult as parting the sea. Why make it so difficult? Why not let everybody just easily find their soulmate? and just focus on what their purpose in life instead of having to go through the whole challenges and the agony, as many of us know how difficult it could be, and many of us have to deal with it. And I give everyone a blessing. It should be with the least amount of aggravation and finding your soulmate. But it is a challenge. It doesn't come easy. So it's a similar question, asking why is it that we have this attraction and yet we can't live up to it until we firstly develop our own identities. The point is, because the purpose of the world of existence is not to make it easy. It's in order to make a dira b'tachtenim, as the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 36 in Tanya. Tachtenim implies the lowest of worlds, which means a world that's dark, a world that's confusing, a world on its own can be often that's distracting. And the challenge is not to get distracted. That's part of the purpose. Part of the purpose is finding your soulmate, not just living with that soulmate and marrying and building a beautiful home, but actually finding. And then it's your effort that found it. And that's part of the fulfillment, that in a world where there's so many people distracted, people busy with themselves, people spending their time building their careers and just inflating their own individual lives, that instead of doing that and following that temptation, go out and make the effort to find your soulmate. The same thing as us as we turn into adults and adolescents, enter puberty. Yes, God made that challenge. The challenge is that, yes, a man will be attracted to a woman to a man. That's a natural thing. And to have the wisdom to understand that before you pursue that, first build up your identity. Before you look for your soulmate, first find your own soul. Build it up. Develop the confidence. Develop the maturity, the emotional maturity to have a healthy, intimate, and beautiful marriage and relationship with your spouse. So God made it, yes, there's a challenge. Like everything in life, there's a challenge. It doesn't come on a platter. But that challenge, we're given all the strengths and wisdom necessary to face that challenge and do it the right way. That's what we have meant to have healthy homes, a good education, and so on. In a way, you could ask the same question about childhood altogether. If the purpose of life is to be an adult and build a life where you can be responsible for your behavior, why have children? Why couldn't God create us all like Adam and Eve, age 20, mature adults, and that's that, and start? The same question can be asked about Matan Torah. We know Breishis b'shil Yisrael b'shil Torah. The whole world was created in order that we should for Torah and mitzvahs, that we shall fulfill God's will and desire as it's in Torah in this world and for Torah. So why did God wait 26 generations to give the Torah? He should have given it immediately to Adam and Eve. And the answer to all this lies in the fact that we have to earn our way. A child growing up in a home goes through the education process, being taught and trained. Instead of it being given to you, you're now an adult, you earn your way. And parents are given the gift of being able to nurture and care for a child and prepare a child to go into this world. If it were done the other way, it would have been some type of gift from above, instead of us earning our way, which we know is far more effective and far more perpetuating. Because then it's something that you own instead of it be given to you. The same thing with the Torah. Obviously, the Ovis and Odom Achava as well fulfilled the Torah even before it was given. The Torah is the blueprint for life. God looked into the Torah and then created the world. But it was not given formally. They have to earn their way. And though they were given many gifts, but they have to earn their way to like an education process and train yourself to get to that place instead of it becoming given to you without that training. So everything is done in life in a way, like Rabbi Akiva was asked by that, Apakedus or Min, if God wanted to have circumcised boys, he should have been born circumcised. Why are you going and mutilating and creating a circumcision? And Rabbi Akiva brilliantly answered, if God wanted us to have bread, he should give us bread. Why did he give us barely grain? When I say barely, I mean we have to go find the seeds and plant them, and the grain grows, and then you have to cut the grain and then thresh it until it becomes flour that you can mix with water and become bread. Because the life is lases lesaken. Which means that God created a partnership. He gives us the resources, and our job is to access those resources and develop them and turn them into a benefit. This is the basis of technology. This is the basis of all human development. We're given the tools, but it took thousands of years to discover electricity, thousands of years to discover the technologies we have today. They were embedded in the universe. They're all tapping into divine and natural forces in existence. But this is the process. This is the partnership. God gives us the raw material, and we're the partners that develop it, access it, reveal it with the challenges that we face, including the challenges of teenage years. It would have been easier without them, but the challenge is part of the journey. and part of the purpose. Okay. Another follow-up. This is regarding the Hanochas. 2 weeks ago I spoke about the Hanochas. Hanochas are the transcripts that could say the written documentation of what we heard when the Rebbe would farbring, especially Shabbos and Yontif, when it had to be done by memory, which was the Chazorah that we needed to do. And then the Hanocha is placing it down on paper. These are words that we use back even in the Alter Rebbe's times. You have the word Hanocha, Manichim, and Chayzrim. Of course, in the time of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, both of them did not write most of their Torah, or almost none of their Torah is written by them, if anything at all. The Arizal was as well the same way, as I mentioned, Rab Chaim Vital wrote, and even the Zohar, Rab Shbi didn't write it, Rab Abba wrote it based on his instruction. And for that matter, you could say all of Torah Shebal Peh is oral Torah. As the Maimonides Rambam explains in the introduction to Pirush Mishnayos, the way it was done was that people you're not allowed to write down what you heard. So they'd make short notes for themselves on a tablet, and that later, when it started being forgotten, when it became apparent that if you don't start writing it down, the Torah will be lost. That's why they defied Heferet Torah Secha in order to preserve the Torah. And that from then on we have the Mishnah, and then later the Gemara, and what we have Talmud and Torah Shebal Peh. So all Jews were technically chayzrim. They were all memorizers, and later wrote it down. So Talmud, you could say, is the first Hanocha, is the students writing down what they're hearing in the Beis Medrash, first by the Tanoim, then the Amoraim, and then the generations later, each in their time, in their form and fashion. So this is a process really that was there all the time. But over the years, what really became more exclusive to the Chassidic community, especially the Rabbeim, especially the Rebbe, who spoke more than all the Rabbeim, and especially on Shabbos and Yontif, where you needed, there was no other choice, the Chazorah and the Hanocha. So we spoke about the process, and there were a few follow-up questions which I shall read, and try to elaborate a little more on this very fascinating inner sanctum, inner secrets of the inner sanctum that many are so intrigued by. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. I had a few questions regarding the topic you began last week. What he means is 2 weeks ago, episode 103. So those that are listening now for the first time, episode 103 is the first part of this. I'm not going to repeat what I said then. I'll just continue. Namely, the process of Hanochas. This fellow was writing about. 1. Often when you learn a Muggah Dika Sicha and you learn the built-in Muggah version, which means Muggah meaning the edited version, Muggah the Rebbe editing it, and then you learn the built-in Muggah, the unedited version that was the Rebbe did not edit, you find that they are very different. In real life, the Rebbe mentioned a point in a few lines, but in the Muggah, in the edited version, it takes a notable portion. Also, many of the notes in the bottom were not said by the Rebbe. Is everything considered the Rebbe's words, or maybe some of it is just the ideas of the Manichim, meaning of the writers? I was always taught that every word is holy, but this question always bothers me. Number 2, the Sichos in the later years seem very hard to follow. Did you ever have trouble understanding them? 3, I'm sure everyone would enjoy if you could share an interesting story about a specific Sicha you had trouble with that the Rebbe had to be consulted with. Thanks for your time. Okay, good. Question 2. Last week you addressed the topic of the writing of the Sichos, and you said you would come back to it. Here are a few follow-up questions if you do. You mentioned that when the Rebbe was Magir the Sicha, the Manichim were less careful to stick to exactly what the Rebbe said. It's not exactly what I said. I'll clarify that in a moment, but I just don't want it to be passed with as if I said that. Would it be correct to say that sometimes, or more than sometimes, the Manichim, the writers, would add some of their own ideas or insights into the Hanochim to see if the Rebbe would leave it in the Sicha? This question often comes up in discussions about the Sichos, on Mashiach, etc. But the question is addressed specifically to all Sichos, not just those that dealt with Inyoni, Mashiach, etc. In a similar vein, I have seen people be medayik. Medayik means being precise, focusing on and trying to understand in a koitze shel yud, meaning even in a nuance, a detail of the edited Sichos, the edited talks, as well as Likutei Sichos, which, as I explained then, are the talks that were not part of the Farbrengens, but done later, an excerpt from a Sicha, which the Rebbe edited on a weekly basis during certain years. In later years, all the years, including the Ha'aris and Mara Mekamis, meaning the footnotes and the sources. Do you think this is how the Rebbe intended the Sicha to be learned? Meaning, be medayik, that people should emphasize every note, every point. Do you have guidance from the Rebbe himself as to what level of diuk, what level of precision he thought was appropriate in a Sicha, in the Ha'aris, and the Mara Mekamis? And finally, question 3 on this topic, a Gavaldik Yeshakech, to follow up on last week's video. Just to restate what you said about the Hanocha of the Yiddish Sichos. The Yiddish Sichos are not a literal transcript of what the Rebbe said. Such a thing would be humanly impossible. Would not be humanly possible on a regular Shabbos, let alone a 3-day Yom Tov with numerous Farbrengens. However, the Manichim were able to reconstruct the ideas communicated by the Rebbe in near entirety. Is that an accurate sum of what you said? I was reading recently that sometimes the Likutei Sichos would be republished after Shabbos with changes. And the fellow sends an example from Tetzaveh Tavshem Memches, a link. Why is it that a Sikha needed to be reissued with changes after it was Mugeh? Would the reissued Sichos also have been Mugeh? In the Sichos that you wrote and the Rebbe edited, was it the case that they were reissued or eventually published in Sfarim in a different form than first published? Thank you for addressing this topic in your straight talk style. Okay, so many similar questions. Let me just respond. Let me just explain something which is really important, and of course you can see it from all the questions. The Rebbe, besides being a Rebbe, was a major Talmud Chacham, of course. Knew the whole Torah from beginning to end, all the Torah Shepshat, Torah Shebal Pshat, Remez Drusad, all the Sfarim. And you could see it throughout his talks, through his writings, and so on. When a Talmud Chacham speaks, when a scholar speaks, and let's talk Pasha Begashmis, you're talking about a person who's accumulated and has a tremendous amount of knowledge, and he can't be saying it all within a Farbrengen of 2, 3, 4 hours. So when he talks about a topic, you can imagine the topic has much more to it than just what meets the eye. And the Rebbe did not spell out every sefer and every commentary on commentary as he was explaining the idea. And this could be whether it's Pshat like Rashi, or Rambam Halacha, or mysticism, Kabbalah, Chassidus, Kut Levi Yitzchok, or pure Rein Chassidus Chabad. Whatever it may be, the Rebbe, that's what the Rebbe did. Now, at times he would say, Shteit in Tere'er, Shteit in Gemara, Shteit in Medrash, Shteit in Zayar. But very often the Rebbe did not. And even when he said it once, it didn't mean he said all the sources and so on. So let's talk Pasha Begashmis. If you were hearing a scholar speak, let alone a Rebbe, you understand there's more there than what was just said. And it's your job, if you really want to be true to the integrity of the presentation of the idea shared, is to go look up all those sources as much as you can, humanly possible. And suddenly you see then and appreciate far more than what you heard at first base, at surface level. So even scholars listening to the Rebbe still would have to do that. Why? Because you don't always know all the nuances and every source and so on. Now, that was our job. So besides the fact that our job was to write down what the Rebbe said, remember the Rebbe did not want, and it doesn't make any sense, to just write down literally without if the Rebbe is bringing a half a line from a Torah and you just hear the line, you can't read it properly, you look in the Torah, you see it, so you quote a larger source. You read the Marsha, for example. I think Rabbi gives this example. You learn the Marsha and you don't learn the Gemara, you're not going to understand the Marsha. Either Marsha doesn't quote the whole Gemara, he only quotes one line, if anything. That's the process. You open up the Gemara, you look at the Marsha, and if you want to explain the Marsha, you first begin with the Gemara. Either Marsha didn't bring the Gemara, or for that matter, Gemara and Mishnah. You learn the Gemara. The Gemara is based on lines in the Mishnah. We all know anyone who learns properly, that makes a good learning and knows how to learn a shtickle Gemara, that when you learn the Gemara, you have to follow and go back to the Mishnah and look and see. This is the piece of the Mishnah, and now we're explaining it. So it's a common practice in any type of proper learning is to put it into context, because the writer or the speaker may only be saying one piece of it. So besides getting down Chazorah, and this was the process, and I shared this, firstly remembering, absorbing without processing. Especially what the Rebbe said. That was the first step. So we got it all down. We did it first Shabbos and by memory. After Shabbos, we wrote down the notes. Now we had not a transcript, it's not a full transcript, but the points were all down. Now comes the much harder work, to put it into the context. Because the Rebbe may have said something, he may have spelled it out even, explained it well. But the Rebbe insisted, and it's a normal thing, that you have to put it in context. Before you find out, the Rebbe, for example, speaking a whole sugi on what Shabbos is, and then you realize it's a whole Maimon in Likutei Torah. So you're going to ignore the Maimon Likutei Torah because the Rebbe said it this way. The Rebbe is explaining the Likutei Torah. Sometimes he said so, sometimes he didn't. But you could assume that nothing the Rebbe said just came out of the blue. It was all based on, that's what Torah is. Torah is taking what was said before and adding to it or explaining it. So Hanocha was meant to does that. Now the question is, how far can you go? So the Rebbe didn't edit it. Obviously, we only went as far as we could take the responsibility to flesh it out and put it into a contextual sense, and not just write word for word, but actually look up the Gemaras, look up the Midrashim, and so on. When the Rebbe would edit it, obviously the Rebbe is going to see it, and he's going to edit it, so you can take more liberty, not more liberty chas v'shalom, to add your own thing. To essentially ask the Rebbe, is this really how you explained it? And the Rebbe, of course, would know because he knows where he took it from. So when there was the edited, we were able to take more liberty in the sense of developing it further, where in a Hanocha that was not Mugeh, we would develop as much as we can based on our understanding of it. But there was never, and I make it clear, unequivocally clear, never any addition made, one letter not added by a maniach. And I speak obviously for myself, I can't speak for other maniach. Any maniach that had integrity would not add a letter. And you ask the question, how the Rebbe looked at it? Look at the Sichos. What does Hanocha say? The Hanocha Sichos kveit gushas amushlit. Whether Mugeh or Bilti Mugeh, it's not my Sich. You don't see my name on it. You will not see Rabbi Elkan's name on it. You won't see other Manichim's name on it. You may know that they wrote the Hanocha. But for record, there was never a thing where he wrote, this Hanocha was written by this Maniach. So there reigns the Rebbe's name on it. Now this was the big achrayis that we had, was to make sure to preserve the integrity of the Rebbe, that forever and ever this would be reflect what the Rebbe Taka said. So yes, it's a great responsibility. And I don't think anybody can just get over the street and do it. First of all, it takes a certain amount of skill and effort and experience to retain the Rebbe's words, absorb them. Then takes the skill and understanding Teire B'chlal and Chassidus B'frat, and putting it into the right contextual way that it could be read and learned properly. And even then, Shgias Miyavin, we're all human beings. Of course a person can make a mistake. We tried our best. We had Siyayta D'Shmaya. Now when the Rebbe edited, there's B'chlal nothing to talk about. Hamaniach Hanoch, at the end of the day, it's Al Achrayis Hashem, as it says often. It's the responsibility of the listener. That's how we heard it. When the Rebbe edited it, it doesn't say Al Achrayis Hashem anymore. It says clearly the Rebbe edited, which means not only what he added is edited, what he left is also edited. On the contrary, you could say what he added or changed maybe because there was a mistake. Sometimes it was he added more havana, more understanding. But regarding what he left there is exactly as if he would have written it, because the Rebbe knew this is going to be published in his name. So every word, yes, is b'diyuk, but tachlis hadiyuk. Would you say is the same diyuk as Teresh B'Ksav and Chumash? We know even Gemara is not the same diyuk as Teresh B'Ksav. Even Mishnah Teresh, which mepi Meisha Atzmei, Meisha mepi Atzmei, meaning Meisha speaks in the first person, is somewhat different. It's still Teresh B'Ksav, and it's still Teresh. The same thing with the Rebbe's words. Yes, if the Rebbe had written it himself from beginning to end, the whole Fabrengen, I'm sure it would have been a better Hanocha than we made. But you see throughout that we have Maimorim that the Rabbeim wrote, and we have a Maimon that the Maniach wrote. Obviously, the Rebbe's writing it is absolutely, without any question, the highest level. But a Maniach writing it, and especially the Rebbe edited, is one step, I'm going to say one step below, but that's the Rebbe being editing it. So anything you see in footnotes, anything you see in sources was all directed by the Rebbe. That's what the Rebbe wanted. We have to wait for the Rebbe to write Breishis, Sporel Akim is Breishis, Aleph, Aleph. Let the Rebbe spend the time adding Havanans, and we would add the footnotes. So there are many things we could do that essentially were doing the legwork for the Rebbe. Now, in the early years, when the Rebbe wrote footnotes to the Maimorim, or he had Shuvas Sabiyurim, or other things the Rebbe wrote in the Rishimas, he wrote his own footnotes. But we learn from that. We learn from the Rebbe's style, the Rebbe's method, and we replicate it. And when a Fabrengen, therefore, was far more than just listening to a Fabrengen and writing down what you heard. It was also taking it and putting it into the context of what a scholarly and Talmud Chochem, and especially a caliber of the Rebbe, was addressing. I'll just give you one example. I remember Shabbos Pasha Vayikra Tov Shin Mem. And the Rebbe just began Tzivus Hashem then. It was the first year I was writing Fabrengens. And the Rebbe spoke then, right in the beginning. He started the Fabrengen with connecting everything with children. So he said, of course, Sefer Vayikra, it says in Medrash and in Sforim, it says to start learning with children Sefer Vayikra. Why? Because Vayikra is Sefer HaTahirim. So Yovet Tahirim v'Yisasku b'Tahirim. Tahirim refer to the children, pure and innocent, that they should begin with learning the Yoni Tara, the pureness, purity of the laws of Tara in Sefer Vayikra, laws of Karbonis, Kotshim, and so on. The Rebbe began discussing the whole thing, and it was very complicated. What Teherim is and the concept of Teherim, back and forth. You could look up the Hanochim in Tov Shemem, Vayikra Tov Shemem. I remember after Chazara, we memorized and we repeated everything. I started sitting down and starting to try to figure out the first Sikha, the structure, and I really didn't understand it. I went and asked some of the other Chazim, asked Rabbi and others, and they too said, this is what we heard. But what was the Havana? It was not so clear. And I could know there was something going on here more than meets the eye. And I started looking in Chassidus, I started looking in the Sugi and Chassidus in the different Maimorim. Do they talk about Yaskub B'Teherim, or Tar is, and Tar? I couldn't find anything. So I began writing and seeing how it's going to go. Let me see what's missing. In this type of cases, you couldn't just go right to the Rebbe. By the way, Rebbe, tell us what you're talking about. That was not appropriate. Appropriate was to work hard, figure it out, and then if you had a nuance, a question, a specific thing, you couldn't just say to the Rebbe, where's the talk about this? What are you referring to? That's not what we did. Anyway, I think it was early Sunday morning or maybe late Mitzvah Shabbos, and I was struggling, and I'm, one place, when you know how to research, you look, one place leads you to another place, and I felt I'm going to find something that needs some detective work. And yet, lo and behold, Asugi and Zvachim Dafkuf Yutes, if I recall correctly, Mamish, you start reading it, you see they come alive, the whole Sikha. I didn't know the Sugya, with all due respect to me. The others didn't know the Sugya. It's not something you find in other Farbrengens. Often the Rebbe spoke about in Yonim that you could trace it in the previous Farbrengens, something similar or briefly. No, never spoke about it before. A whole Sugya in Zvachim. And when you know the Sugya, you suddenly realize that's what the Rebbe meant. That's what the Rebbe meant. So someone's going to come who heard the Farbrengen and now read the Hanoch and say, 1 second, where's this Gemara Zvachim coming from? The Rebbe didn't mention Zvachim, didn't mention this line. But if you read the Sikha properly and you start thinking about it, you start saying, this is the Gemara. The Rebbe was like I mentioned before, the Mashal. He was explaining a Gemara and using the Gemara to base a whole sugya in the inyan of Yaskub B'Teherim. Hundreds of such examples, on and on and on, I could go on. Often we knew the sugya before or after the Rebbe said it, but often we did not. Okay, I hope that answered some of the questions. Let me see here if I did. So everything is considered the Rebbe's words, absolutely. I corrected, I said, it says that the Rebbe's Magiyah, the Sikh, the Manichim were less careful to stick to exactly what the Rebbe said. No, I did not say anything close to that. I said what I said now. When the Rebbe's Magiyah Sikha, we felt we could then take the responsibility of embellishing and developing it further, and then asking the Rebbe to see if that's correct. And I say embellishing, I don't mean anything that's not consistent. In the Hanocha, you'll find the same idea, but you wouldn't necessarily flesh it out as much. And if the Rebbe didn't edit the Sikh, I should add, we never published that, obviously. We went back to the original. And there were times that I sent something into the Rebbe to have the Rebbe edit. The Rebbe did not edit it. So we wrote it in a more modest fashion, if you want to put it that way, in a more limited way. But if you started studying the Sugya, you'd see that the Hanocha could, if you had the Rebbe's input, could have developed the idea and understood it further. And there are many, many such examples. Anyone that does any learning knows this. That you can learn something and you see there's some chiddush that the teacher added, but you don't quite know the chiddush. So if you don't have direct Torah from the mechadish, from the teacher, the Rebbe in this case, you can't go ahead and speculate. So you just write it in a way, those that want to read and understand that chiddush, maybe they'll figure it out, maybe not. But if you could actually have the one who said it actually look at it and say, is this the chiddush? Absolutely. And very often the Rebbe actually pushed us and said, why don't you ask a question? And when we asked a question, we revealed something far. The Rebbe revealed to us something much deeper and more profound about that particular topic. About the republishing, yes, there were times the Rebbe edited a sikha that was printed, even Hanochi Biltimuga. I remember Rosh Hashanah, Tov Shem Aleph. We prepared the whole Farbrengen. It was Shnas Hakel, a very special year. And the Rebbe edited the Hanoch. The printed Kuntres was printed with footnotes, and there was very little room for margins because it was a published piece. The Rebbe edited the whole thing and said, actually, that week they should print that instead of the Likutei Sichos. So the Sikha, the Likud they prepared from earlier years, a Sikha from earlier years was replaced by this Sikha, Rosh Hashanah Tov Shem Aleph, a very interesting Sikha, actually. Well, all interesting, but something very unique about it. You can look it up as well. I think it's printed at the end of Chelik Chav Daled, volume 24, Likutei Sichos. So, let me see anything else. And yes, there were times after it was printed, the Rebbe edited, and of course, it's a common thing that in learning there's a Madura Basra, there's a Madura Shniya, there's a Madura Kama, Madura Basra. Even Tanya is that way. The Rambam has a Madura Kama, Madura Basra, the Tanya. And then in other places, the Rabbeim themselves, as they wrote, let's say, Hemshech, they edited it. It's a common thing to add. This doesn't mean that the previous edition is not accurate. It means that you could always add, it's Torah, but you could always add, you could always elaborate. There were sikhs that Rebbe's Magiya 4 or 5 times. The Rambam, the Hadran, the Rambam, and Tav Shalom Hey, Kuntus Shinor Shoteres Achsidis, to name a few, and others as well, that the Rebbe edited more than once, and sometimes edited once and then edited again for Apardis, for Hamoyer, when it was published in these Keftzei Torah that were published for the larger world. So you have, sometimes he edited in Hebrew, in Yiddish, and then later in Hebrew. So you have many, many edits. That's always possible, and I'm sure the Rebbe could always be able to add, and I think he once actually said that he could always add more and more. Okay. If you have more questions on this topic, I'll be happy to take them, but let's move on to the next part of this discussion, this episode. And the next question is, where are we? Is Chassidus compatible with a 12-step recovery program? How should a chassid view healing programs like the 12 steps? Is the affirmation that we are powerless over our addiction, and that, quote unquote, which is from the 12 steps, and that we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God, and are entirely ready to, quote unquote, and are, quote, entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character, quote unquote, a contradiction to what the Torah teaches us? Are these statements, these affirmations as contradiction to what the Torah teaches us? Is there ever any justification to lessen one's mitzvah observance in the name of recovery and healing? Is this consistent with the concept of iskafia, 12 steps that is, and the iskafia meaning restraint or refraining from, and the methods Chassidus teach us in exercising restraint and conquering our obsessions? Okay, so a whole bunch of questions that came in about the 12-step program, and because of time, I'm not going to read them all. I'll read one, and if necessary, I'll read others in later episodes if necessary. Question. Rabbi Jacobson, a friend of mine, is recovering from a very serious addiction and has been joining a program of the 12 steps. I noticed that his observance of Torah has diminished, and when we discussed this, he told me that people at the program say that is a normal thing to happen, as you learned in the program more about connecting to God as opposed to fulfilling necessarily what we are taught is important, meaning mitzvahs. I understand, obviously, that this is a very distorted way of doing things. My question was only if I should discuss it with him, or maybe having him question the fundamentals of the program are going to cause him to relapse back into his addiction. I saw that even just mentioning to him that I wasn't sure about the approach got him a little uneasy, and I right away backed off as not to undermine his belief in the program, being that at this point it is literally his whole support system. Could it be that somebody in such a situation is simply not in control of himself, to a point where we should just let him follow the steps, hoping that he will one day come back to a point where he is open to hearing and listening about what real belief in Hashem is? And once, when discussing the 12-step program, I want to ask in general, is the affirmation, I am powerless over my addiction, a contradiction to what the Torah teaches us? Okay, let's begin with this. Because of time, I want to make sure I cover this, and then, as I said, I will address the other questions, either directly now in this context, or read them separately at next week. So, let's begin with this. The Torah was given to us by God, and the Torah includes, of course, as the Rebbe brings from the Gemara, that Barasile Yetzer Hara, Barasile Teira Tavlin. I created the Yetzer Hara, and I created the Torah as a trufa, as a healing, a medication, or a spice, however you define Tavlin, to heal this issue. The Rebbe explains in Kuntres Shinyan Shoteres Achsidis in chapter 17, in the footnote there, and I've discussed this, a very big basis of a lot of what we discuss here. How could you say and render Torah into this just a trivial thing of just being a medication to help someone that's not well, or to heal from the Yetzer Hara? And the Rebbe says that's not the pshat. The pshat is, where do you see the atzmis of Torah, the power of Torah, when it's able to heal a situation here on earth? So Torah is beyond any type of function to serve us. As actually David HaMelech was punished when he says, Zmiris hoyelich chukecha. So it says, Zmiris karisalahu, you're calling it Zmiris? Song. Was it here to serve you as song? That Torah is beyond Shashuyim Lefonov. It's God's playthings. It's God's intimate, connected, the Reisa is one. So what exactly is the meaning behind these words? That is Tavlin. So the Rebbe says that's where the etzem, the essence of Torah, is reflected. Now, at the same time, we also know the Torah says, Nitn Rishus l'reif l'rapis. The Torah says, gave permission to a doctor to heal. So is this a contradiction? Why do we look in the Torah for healing? Because the Torah itself said we're empowering individuals who study medicine, mamata l'mayla, not through Torah necessarily, and they have the power to help heal. Human beings have the ability to figure out. Now, of course, the ultimate would be a doctor who knows Torah and knows medicine, and brings them all together in a beautiful, holistic healing system. But because we live in a world where we don't always have that, so obviously there's the concept of going to a doctor, even the doctor is not necessarily familiar with Torah. The 12-step program has been proven to be helpful to people in the area of alcohol, drug, or other type of addictions. Is it a Torah thing? Some try to find parallels, and maybe they're legitimate, but you don't need to necessarily find one. If it's a healing element, and it doesn't have in it anything that contradicts the Torah, why is it different than any other form of healing? Now, do these ideas contradict? It depends how you use them. There are those that have used 12-step program in ways that they contradict Torah. And I should add another thing before I get further. It is impossible that the Torah should ask us to do something that's unhealthy for us to do. We're only asked what we're capable of doing, and the Torah cannot ask us to do something that's unhealthy. So let me make a very clear statement. To say that one has to in any way diminish their commitment to mitzvahs in order to heal is absolutely false. You could say the way you were taught to do mitzvahs was taught in an unhealthy way, in an angry way, in a intimidating way, in a invalidating way, but not the mitzvah. Im reiku mikemu. That's because the teachers or the family or the one way it was presented was unhealthy. But Torah and mitzvahs was given to us by God to be the best possible we could be. How could that be a contradiction to living up to your healthiest you? The way it's presented, possibly. Again, but that's the baby, there's the bathwater. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. So that's an important distinction to make. So let's now go back to this. If a doctor suggests something that's hepech HaTorah, unless we're talking about pekuach nefesh, a doctor says this is life-threatening, so then the Torah itself says, listen to the doctor. Even in Yom Kippur, to do something that would be otherwise osir. Because then it becomes mutter. And more than that, some say even, like the Alter Rebbe has the bracket in the Geras HaKedesh, Isser Heter Gomor. And the Rebbe explains. Some will say, like the Eirach Chaim says, that on the contrary, by Bimechal Shabbos Achas, in order to Shemesh Shabbos Harbe, by desecrating one Shabbos, it makes you be able to keep Shabbos. So in a way, it's sanctifying Shabbos, because Shabbos Torah was given v'chai behem, to live with it, v'lo sheyamos behem. So if Torah mitzvahs causes you to die, you ultimately undermining Torah and mitzvahs. But that's a pekuach nefesh situation. If a doctor tells you have to do something to break a mitzvah, and it's not a pekuach nefesh, that cannot be. Unfortunately, there are many healing programs that are addressing the unhealthy elements of religious communities and cultures. But you have to distinguish that from Torah and mitzvahs. That's a culture. There could be, yes, you could. We live in a hostile, as I said, an ugly world, and you could be growing up in a culture that's called Shemer Torah mitzvahs, and that should be unhealthy, an unhealthy home. That's part of healing. So I would say the 12-step program depends how it's presented. Those lines can be seen as a declaration of faith, trusting God, and recognizing that you need Hashem's help, Kodesh Baruch Hu Ezrei, help in everything you do, or it can be seen as almost like avoiding your own responsibility, absolving yourself and say, I cannot do anything about it, which then can be borderline, not Torah approach. There are other approaches that say we are sinners, original sin, and we have to rely on others to be able to save us. That's not a Torah approach. So it's a combination of Hashem Elokecha b'chol asher taseh. We have to do everything possible. And then you have God's help. If it's interpreted that way, it's fine. Those particular lines. So to sum up, the 12-step program per se has elements in it that definitely have healing elements, but you have to see who's the practitioner, how it's being presented, and is it consistent with Torah mitzvahs. That's why you need to have a Rav, or a Chassidus Mashpia, or both. But they also understand two things. They know what we're dealing with. They're not just talking about 12 steps in a vacuum or from a distance, and they just say it's no good because it doesn't sound right. Or you need Chassidus for everything. You're dealing with addictions, and Chassidus and the Mashpia may not have a solution to someone who's alcoholic or someone who's drug addicted, may need rehab. But it's important to know that this is being sanctioned and therefore understood by people who are sensitive, people who understand both parts of it, what the healing elements are, what that healing system is like, to make sure it's consistent with Torah, consistent, and of course to see whether Chassidus can do the same or more and let them complement each other. So that's the general answer to that question. And the same thing with other healing systems, whether it's 12 steps or others. As far as some individuals on a sensitive level, that you have questions, whether the question was that he's connecting to God and not so much to God's mitzvahs, this is case by case. As I said, there's no such thing as a mitzvah being a contradiction to someone's healing. However, someone may have been hurt by a religious culture, and that's where you need a mashpia to help you distinguish between the two and be able to so-called free yourself from the toxic elements of your environment and access the pure and healthy elements of Torah and mitzvahs. That is more complicated and something that is beyond the scope of this discussion. So that's where you need to have a good trained person, but that you need a mashpia, someone who knows Chassidus well, and knows how to apply Chassidus well, and understands again where the Chassidus is setting the tone. And sometimes you may need, yes, a doctor or another type of program that could help complement it in the context of addictions or clinical elements and so on and so forth. Just like medicine is not a contradiction, medical medicine is not a contradiction, even psychological medicine that is necessary at times due to different psychosis or different illnesses of the mind or the heart and emotions. As I said, there's more to say on this, but I'll leave that as part 2, and then I'll read the other questions. Okay, next question. Okay. This is a follow-up as well. Our God versus their God. Do we have a different version of God than the non-Jews have? Please clarify the idea you spoke about, our God as opposed to theirs. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I enjoy your weekly sessions, and I share so much of what you teach with people around me who enjoy it as well. You mentioned, I would say about a month ago, about answering a child's questions on issues of faith, that we don't necessarily have a different God than the non-Jews. It was quite interesting to me, as I've never heard such an approach in the first place. When I repeated it to my husband, he mentioned to me the famous song of Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev, in which it is mentioned that the non-Jews say that their God is a God, to which I answer no. Only our God is a God. On a simpler note, we say every day, Ein Kelekenu. Are we only referring to our God as opposed to idols, or are we really negating the God of any other nation or people who claim to have a God? What I said then, and I'll repeat now, is the following. There's one God that created the entire universe and every human being on this earth. Shem Echad U'Shmo Echad. When Mashiach comes, we said, Oz Epech Kol Amim El Amim Shafa Brura Lov De Kulam Shechem Echad. That all the nations will remain nations and they will serve one God. They will call Beisi Beis Tefillah Kol Amim. The Beis Hamikdash will be the house of prayer to all nations. So the concept of Hashem Echad is one God for all peoples. When the Jews came by Matan Torah, and there was the whole racket, the whole world heard the noise, and they came running to Bilam, and Bilam says, Hashem Eiz La'am Yitin, Hashem Yivorech Chesam V'Shalom. God is giving the Torah to His people, and clearly the Torah therefore has impact on the entire world. The Torah includes the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, as the Rambam says, and also that it was given at Sinai. So at the end of the day, there's one God, and there's one blueprint for the entire world, of course. Just like there's a difference between Kohanim, Levim, Yisraelim among the Jews, Lahavdil, among the Jews and non-Jews have different roles. So fundamentally, it's one God. Now, people can choose a false God, whether it's an idol or it's a misunderstanding of what God is. And that's when you say that the God that they're interpreting is a false God, it's a deity, a false deity, and so on. So yes, there's the concept of a false God, but even Jews could choose a false God too. Unfortunately, we built the golden calf, some of Jews did. So the concept is that there's one God for all. Our responsibility is to share that God with everyone. So that I believe answers the question. There is no we have one God, they have a different God, and we're playing here a competition. The God that created the universe, the God that gave the Torah, the God that put every human being on this earth is the God that all people should be worshiping and connecting to. And when the Rebbe speaks about a moment of silence, even in public schools, and even when the Rebbe was told that perhaps they'd be using that moment for their own religion, the Rebbe said, better that, and they have the connection to God, than not have any connection. As the Rebbe writes in different places, there's a very interesting sikha from Tavshin Chof Aleph, 1961 Shvuos, printed in the back of Likutei Sichos Chelik Ches, Volume 8, where the Rebbe answers all these points. To the point that even Apikursim was seen worse. People who deny God were worse than people who had a God that were based on religion like Christianity or something of that nature. So the bottom line is, yes, there is one God, and there's no reason to create this competition. That's our job, is to teach. We're not talking about getting into a debate, but frankly, I would say that even many Jews don't even know what this God is like. That's why we have Chassidus. That's why we're taught what God is like. That's exactly v'yadaitis Hashem Elokeichem. It's to know God, das Elokei Avicha, to know what this God is like. The Alter Rebbe writes in Kuntres Achron, it's a mitzvah roman is govamei. It's a great, exalted, a tremendous mitzvah to know God, to know Seder Shtalshus, to know how God created the world. So yes, we can have a childish view of God, which is, as we'll soon discuss from Tereir, which is Atzmus itself, without any hasoge. But as adults, we're expected to have a comprehension, and we're expected to share it. And many of us, when we start learning what God is like, you suddenly realize the real God, may the real God stand up, as Rabbi Yitzchak Baditchever told once in Self-Proclaimed Atheist, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. So we are responsible of actually sharing the true God with everyone, individual. And this is not about, again, competition and trying to get into a match of whose God is better than others. It's one God that was created for us all. What did Avram Avinu do? There were no Jews and non-Jews then. Vayikra Avram, Vayikra Elokim Keil Elam, as the Rebbe brings. That God is the God of the universe. The Rebbe brings in the first Maimer Bas Lagani from the Ramban, which actually we're still looking for where that Ramban is. The God and the universe are one. Now there's different levels how people understand this God. Meaning, you can learn Mamala Kalam, Seviv Kalam, and you can grow in understanding, but it's all about one God. Okay. Being that we are coming close to the end of the time limit here, there's a few questions that I did not address, so I will move that to the next episode. Let me go straight to the Chassidus question and do the essays after that. Okay, Chassidus question. Please explain the meaning of the Alter Rebbe's famous statement in Torah Er Vayera, the Maimer beginning Pasuk Eliyahu, and pages 14b, that Adraba Hamoyer Hu Be'izgalus. As he explains there, in contrast to light, which is subject to concealment and requires concealment for existence to be, the source, the Moyer, on the contrary, is revealed. How do we understand this revelation when the Alter Rebbe says at the same time that the source is beyond revelation and concealment? So let's read the exact language in Torah Er. It says 14b, and he says like this, that Er is subject to Tzimtzum because Tzimtzum is necessary, because the world would be completely nullified had, like the Alter Rebbe says, had it be completely revealed. So you need to have it concealed. The oil, in a sense, recedes within to the source. It should be only b'koyach, only potential, not actual. And it's concealed there that it should not only be the revelation of light, but not it should not be the revelation of light, only the source. And then in the parentheses, Aval b'moyer shu ein sof atzmei, but the luminary, the source, which is ein sof itself, loy shayach tzimtzum chaz v'shom. You can't say tzimtzum at all. V'loy helam, and no concealment. V'adarabah, here's the v'adarabah. On the contrary, hamoyer hu be'izgalus. the luminary, the source, meaning the etzem, is revealed. And that's why even children know that there's a God, an existent God. Even though they don't have a comprehension and a grasp of how and what, because there's no gili, there's nothing to grab, there's no revelation at all. That's the Eir, but the Moyer, the source, exists below like above. And all this is coming to explain how he explains the whole discussion of Antuchad, the whole discussion of the Seder Shtalshus, of starting from Etzem, and then Eir, and Atzilus, and Biyah, and so on. It's a very fundamental matter. So the questioner is asking, so how do you say the word Gili when you're talking about a level that is beyond Gili and beyond Helam? Very good question. However, the question is asked directly in my Maimorim, and let me give you the sources and just share a few words of explanation. So there's a number of places where this is explained. First of all, making it very clear, we're talking Hamoyer Atzmei, that Samach Vov, and Anechi, Samach Zayin, and Hamshach Samach Vov, that Rebbe Rashab says, Nira, that this is Atzmusei Yisborach. He's talking about Atzmus Mamish. That's in page, let me see if I have the source for that. Yeah. In Anechi, it's page 465 in Samach Vov, in Hamshach Samach Vov. Also, in the end of the Maimon Vayikonu, Tofresh Nun Aleph, page 218, he mentions it. And in Vayikra, the Maimon Vayikra, Tofshin Hey, page 132, which is from the Frierdiker Rebbe. There's a bracha from the Rebbe, Yud Aleph Nisan, a very interesting blessing, when the Rebbe would give a blessing every Yud Aleph Nisan on his birthday. Tofshin Mem Hey, it's printed in volume 27 of Likutei Sichos, page 318, footnote 35. Let me see if I have it here. Yes, I do. So there in the footnote, an interesting footnote, the Rebbe brings and connects it to the idea where it says, in Sheresh Mitzvahs HaTfilah, Tzemach Tzedek brings, Ani mispal l'dazeh hatinuk. He's talking from the Rishal Sheshuvas Rivash, where he's speaking to Amakubla and saying, all these levels of Chesed, Gvura, connecting the Eibishter to these levels, Ani mispal, I pray straight to the Daseh hatinuk. And that same drush, the Rebbe says, since it's brought later in the drush, where the Alter Rebbe said, Im chalei chafatzti, I don't want anything, but I don't want your Gan Eden, I don't want your Elam Haba, I want you alone, means there's a connection. And there the Rebbe says, Yumtuk, according to this Torah Eir, because you're talking about the Moed itself. So that's some sources in the general idea. There's one more place I would like to refer you to, which is a Sicha of Rosh Chodesh Kislev, and Pasha Tel is Tafshin Nun Beis. In Sefer HaSichos, Tafshin Nun Beis, page 127, Ha'ara 59. But however, when it comes to the actual understanding of what does this mean, Hamoyer Hu Bizgalus, so of course there's Hagos, there's footnotes, a gloss on the Sol Maimer plus Chalio from the Rebbe Rashab. He began to write it in Tafresh Nun Dalet, I believe, and concluded in Tafresh Nun Ches. So it's printed Hagos, Lepasach Chalio, footnote Lepasach Chalio, Tafresh Nun Ches. And there he explains clearly the difference in the Gili of Eir and the Gili of Moyer. And he says, Gili of Eir is, its whole purpose is revelation. Its whole purpose is for us to be able to grasp the divine. By definition, that means Atzmus defies any form of grasp. Gili Atzmus, he says, is not the idea of Gili. You're just using the word Gili to say Atzmus, as it is exists. So it's not a Gili as in context that we're going to grasp it. It's a Gili that's in the context of it being Lamaila, just like it is Lamata. In some other places it says, Behelama Atzmei, Nizgalig Atzmusei Kamoishahu. Meaning the way it is, that's why children, it's not a matter that they understand a little. They don't understand anything. It's just that God exists. So despite the fact there was a tzimtzum, we'll soon discuss that in a moment, despite the fact that there was a concealment, yet the Moyer is not subject to any concealment. That's why we can say God exists. Zelikamotzei. Shem Shemayim Shagri. You say Baruch Hashem. That's the point. The point is that there's the fact that just it gives in other places the example. We may not understand our soul, but we know there's a soul. The soul went through tzimtzumim in order to manifest itself and enclose itself in a body. But the mere fact that there's a soul, without knowing what it is, we sense. We sense there's a life force within us. You have no clue what it is. That's somewhat of an example. So when a teacher is teaching, let's say, an idea, to a student, he has to diminish the idea for the student to grasp it. But the etzem of the seichel of the teacher, or the etzem hanefesh of the teacher, doesn't have to diminish. Why? Because it's there. It's not a contradiction. Because as it says in these Maimorim, it doesn't get concealed and it does not get revealed. Just like it doesn't get revealed, it's not subject to concealment. You don't have to conceal it because it's not disturbing the flow. Oir needs to be diminished because without that, the student won't receive. As he says, the worlds won't be able to exist if the oir was dominant, because that's conscious, divine consciousness. But the divine itself, the divine source, is not conscious. It's not conscious, it's not conscious. And that's why we can say it exists. Then it says in some Maimorim even further that dafka through the tzimtzum, that's when the moyer vet is gala. So let me give you a few more sources, both on what I've said. And so I brought the Pasach Eliyahu. Now you also have Min HaMeitzar, Tov Reish Mem Ches, Maimon from the Rebbe Rashab, page 161, 162, cited also in a discourse, in a written piece in Tov Reish Mem Tes, page 269. The Maimer HaKoel Kel Yankiv, Tov Reish Samach, page 43. Shuva, Tov Reish Pei Vov, from the Frierdiker Rebbe. And Chochmas Bachutz Truna, which is in Tov Reish Sadik Dalet, printed in Kontresim, Chelik Beis, page 296a. Reish Sadik Vov, Aleph. And finally, Basel Legani Tovshen Chavtes from the Rebbe, the Mugadik Asichitz in volume 3 of Sefer Maimorim Malukit, chapter 7. But then there's more where he talks about Dafke the Tzimtzum. The best example I can give for it is, let's say, think of a solar eclipse. When you look at the sun in a regular day, the sunlight is so glaring, you can't really see the sun. You definitely can't see the corona, the sun's core. Suddenly, a solar eclipse covers the whole sun, and that's why it's very dangerous to look at it. The corona can be observed then. Because since the giluyim are not getting in the way, then what you have is only the core itself. So the same thing as ideas here. When as little as there's Eid Ein Sof, a world can't exist. That's why you need to conceal the left light. But there's a benefit that comes out of that concealment. That the moyer itself now is accessible, because there's no light to blind us from seeing the moyer. Similar to what the Alter, the Rambam, the Baal Shem Tov's Teira and Tefillah Oni, the Fnei Hashem Yishbech Sichi, the pauper that sees the etzem itself, because he does not distracted by Geluim, he doesn't understand them. So there's more sources here. Siyim b'mishpat Tofrei Samach Beis, page 360. Tzoaku Tofreish Peiches, page 173. Ayin Beis, chapter 349, which is very interesting. There he talks about it in a way that adds a few nuances. Veschanon Tofreish Ayin Tes, page 573, where there he talks about the herigish, that the sense itself, that you sense, even Shem Shemayim Shagur, that you know there's a God, that sense is because there's the Tzimtzum allows us to sense it. And see also Ner Chanukah, Ton Rabban Ner Chanukah, Tofresh Mem Gimel, page 37, and Basel Gani that I mentioned. Okay. So hopefully that explains some of this. Let us now go over to the essays, and we shall then conclude. Okay. 3 essays again. This is still from last year because we've not yet began publicizing this year's essays. The first one's titled, Our Guest Was Having a Bad Hair Day, by Yosef Kainer, age 63, a translator, self-employed, Mala Adumim, Israel. Using the Baal Shem Tov's Torah, that when you see ill in a friend, it's your own ill that you are observing, like a mirror that reflects nothing but you place before it. This writer, in a very interesting personal way, shows how he's gone through this process of being annoyed by others until he comes to realize that he's being annoyed because he's seeing himself in them. Quoting, of course, the Rebbe Sikha on the matter, that your reaction to someone, of course you can see something and you have no reaction to it, but the reaction that you have a negative reaction means there's something in it about you. So it's very well done in that sense, where he literally brings life examples of the annoyance and how he learned to check himself and grow through the process. And then he concludes, you don't have to take my word for it, try it. Look for people who annoy you and then try to figure out why they do. You might find it quite instructive and you will start looking at people in an entirely new light, even when they are having a bad hair day. So that essay, like all essays, can be seen at meaningfullife.com/essays. as well as subscribing to our weekly newsletter, and you will also get the new essays as they are posted. Second essay is by Growing Through Guilt by Rivka Shanowitz, age 21, Chabad of Westmount, Youth Director, Montreal, Canada. And basically it's describing that Chassidus is more meaningful and practical solutions and offers practical solutions more than we could ever hope to find in pop psychology. In this essay, we will explore one of the most down-to-earth and effective concepts that I have personally learned, what the Chassidic approach is to guilt, depression, and sadness. We will get to the core of understanding where depression stems from, what the idea of merirus and what it is not. We will offer practical solutions on how to incorporate merirus into our personal lives and how to rid ourselves of guilt brought on by the Yetzer Hara. And she poses it in a creative way, question and answer, about a person who has negative feelings and so on, and bringing the knowledge of the disease is half the cure. Describing, of course, the difference from Tanya between atzvus and merirus, sadness, as she puts it, and bitterness. One pulls us back, atzvus does, and merirus pushes us forward. And in a very, very beautiful way, goes through how Chassidus' approach to guilt is so much different and much superior to, for example, she quotes Wayne Dyer in Your Erroneous Zones, saying guilt is one of the most useless of all erroneous zone behaviors. His solution is effectively get rid of it, do something you know that is bound to result in feelings of guilt. These types of behaviors will help you tackle the omnipresent guilt. Contrast this approach, this writer writes, of ignoring our consciousness to that of Chassidus, which is confronting our consciousness. I'll let you decide which is more effective, she concludes in her essay. Okay, that's essay number 2. Essay number 3 in Hebrew is titled Uplifting the World. Well, actually, I would retitle it, not Uplifting the World, I would title it The Power of Every Detail. By Chaim Veknin, age 32, Shliach, in Neva Hadorim, Ramallah. And a mashpia in Talmud Torah in Eretz Yisrael. I may be not pronouncing the city right. Okay. This essay begins with the famous story of the Alter Rebbe, where everybody rejected a certain miser, but he went and took even the penny that he would give him. The miser came running back and gave him more for Pidyon Shvuyim, for saving someone who was taken hostage, kidnapped. And then he finally gives him so much more, not just as much to pay, but even for all the poor people. And we learn from that, the point the writer writes, the power of Chassidus. How Chassidus takes a detail, how the Alter Rebbe, by illuminating the value of this detail and not looking and being distracted, he's a big miser, is a miser and could have given much more, revealed in him the power of this detail. Brings, of course, the Nyon Shel Teres Chassidus that I mentioned earlier, about how Chassidus is the etzem of Torah. The etzem is revealed when it helps a detail be resolved. And then continues to shemen. Chassidus is compared to oil, and the liver, picking up everything from the bottom, and ultimately the lesson of the atom, even though it's a detail, but how much power it carries and how much it can affect the entire universe. Very well done essay. Reason I would say did not win is because it could have been fleshed out and should have been fleshed out much more, but its point is well taken. And that essay again is posted there, meaningfullife.com/essays. And with that, we've covered the essays and the themes of this week. So this has been meaningful. This has been My Life Chassidus Applied, brought to you by the Meaningful Life Center, episode 105, every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Please submit your questions, your comments, anything you'd like to share at meaningfullife.com/mylife. And everyone should have a very blessed week, a week of simcha, growing simcha. Every day is Mailan B'Kedesh. We grow and we increase in joy, which is the month of Adar, as we go from the first Adar to the second Adar, and it should only be simchas b'golei, revealed joy for everyone, and it should be a simcha dika year for all people, for all Jews, and for all people in the entire world, till the Gili of, and the Geula Amitis Vashlema will be simchas elam al reisham, total joy. Thank you again. Be well.